We are ready to go. So welcome to Finding Your Me Spot. We titled this based on the play on words. I hope everyone got that. G spot, which is actually being debated, but I don't know how it's actually being debated. The existence of the G spot, the Grafenberg spot, as they call it. So we put together this webinar because we thought this was such a valuable subject, and sex ed is really sort of lacking in a lot of ways, and the true education, and I don't mean to say that it's not true education, but I would say maybe more elaborate education on the subject of sexuality misses a lot of the most recent research, and a lot of this subject is a bit taboo in a way. We're a little afraid to talk about it. So Alexandra and I put this together because, man, it's such a fun subject, and then Alexandra is all up in this too. You nerd all out on this, don't you?
I do. I really do.
So we were going to just take turns introducing each other. So I met Dr. Alexandra Solomon through my good friend Vienna Farron, who is Mindful MFT on Instagram. And Dr. Solomon is a prof at Northwestern University, just north of Chicago. Do you guys say Chicago?
We do, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's like how the suburb jumped into the city. I get it. So she's also the mother of two. She has a son and a daughter. She also has a hubby. And she's not just a teacher, she's also a CrossFitter, a badass CrossFitter. I think that's an important aspect to add to who you are, because you're very passionate about fitness. And Alexandra is just one of my favorite teachers. She's to listen to. She's very relatable. She's funny. And I think she's also an author. I forgot to mention that. And she has a book called Loving Bravely, which I think if you guys follow me on Instagram, you know is one of my favorite books. And I refer to it all the time because I think it's just such a great way to enter into the subject of relationship and who you are and how you relate. And I think it's like a tender welcoming, and it gets you really deep, really. And so many sexual puns I could be having right now, but so deep. But the reason I really love your work is because of the relatability. And I remember reading your book and you talking about listening to Jay-Z on the way to, I think it was on the way to work or something, and you were thinking about it. And I was like, she listens to Jay-Z, badass. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, my good friend.
It's fun. It's just so fun to be working on it. I mean, I have loved the journey to this moment, really, like I think one of the things that draws us to each other is our sort of shared nerdiness, like passing articles back and forth and like, what about this? And what about this? So Mark Groves is a human connection specialist, and he's got lots of elements to his career. And it's been really fun for me to get to know Mark, the human, and all of the ways that he manifests his essence in ways that are like really aligned and with lots of integrity. So he coaches, does relationship coaching. He is a writer who's got a beautiful blog, and then really solid social media feed, Instagram feed, where he's putting out a lot of first of all, positivity and warmth. And just like little, like I love the way that your posts just kind of like anchor, like put reminders, invite awareness to a particular place. It's really a nice, just a really nice expression of who Mark is. And then also he's a speaker. So he goes everywhere and works with businesses and leaders. He has a really incredible new TED Talk that if you guys haven't checked it out yet, it's so worth it. It's you. Like, I love that it's wherever you go, whatever your modality is, it's you're bringing you to it. And he's got the first time we met face to face was at the MOTU Summit, which is Mark's Masters of the Universe Summit that he's organizing. This summer will be the third conference up in Vancouver. Really neat, diverse lineup of speakers and really cool connection that happened among the people who are there.
Oh yeah, you can watch Alexandra's talk from that on the YouTube channel. It's so good. I'll send it in the follow-up too.
Yeah, good.
Sweet.
All right.
Thank you so much for that introduction. All right, guys, now that we're done bragging about each other, we'll get started. So that's all working, right? I'm working?
Yeah, looks great from my end. Mm-hmm.
So we have some sexy time agreements. We were like, you know what, we need to set some agreements, because if we could set these at the start, like with relationships, we're building a relationship with you guys. These are just our understandings, our expectations, and assumptions. So the first one is that sex is just worthy of this curious and compassionate exploration. I mean, I grew up in a Catholic school, so it was not worthy of a curious and compassionate exploration. And that made me not close to my sexuality. It became something that wasn't me, that I was afraid of. So we want you to know that this is just fun. This is we're very, there's a lot of compassion shared in this fun journey.
Mm-hmm. Our second one is that we're always doing the best with what we have. I think as we move through the material today, it's really important to kind of track what's going on inside of you emotionally, and to promise us, and mostly promise yourself, that you'll be nice to you. So if you have the urge to rewind and like get all lost in shame and regret about how you didn't know this and you did this and blah, 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 stop, like big old stop sign in the middle of your forehead, and stop. Because like Mark said in the beginning, none of us really, I mean, very few of us, I have met a few who received some pretty killer sex education when they were younger, but the vast majority of us, we were really left to move into adulthood, into our sexuality, with very few tools at our disposal. So no shaming, no regret. And then also, if you notice yourself fast forwarding and getting kind of lost in like fear and anxiety, like this sounds good, but how am I going to put it into practice? Again, big old stop sign, and just come back to this moment and trust that as your knowledge base expands, as your frameworks expand, possibility expands. So just trust that.
Yeah, and number 3, we're all capable of change. I mean, I reiterate research all the time on growth versus fixed mindset, on neuroplasticity. Like, I could go through all the nerdiness of that, but just know that I've already done the background check. All of us can change. All of us can take what we've experienced and we can transform, and we can, I was actually watching a video the other day where a girl said, I was told that I would never be able to achieve orgasm. That was just that was me. And she went on this journey of discovery, and guess what? She has them all the time now. So just so you know, like your relationship to anything, but in this context of sexuality and intimacy and vulnerability in that space, we can all learn how. They're tools that we can all learn.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Yeah. And then our second to last one, we're all responsible for our own lives. So what you're not responsible for is the shit that's happened to you, right? We're not, by and large, we are not responsible. Well, no, not by and large. We are not responsible for our wounds. We all are walking through this world with wounds and hurts and scars and traumas. And we are not responsible for the shit that happens to us. We are responsible for our healing and for believing in ourselves, for being kind to ourselves. So I love that. I love pointing out that we're not responsible for what has happened to us, but we are responsible for the choices we make going forward, for our awareness, for our possibilities.
And the birth of responsibility is the birth of freedom. And so you are free in number 5 to take what works and to leave what doesn't, because you're not responsible for our feelings. If we feel hurt that you don't listen to everything and do everything we say, we'll survive. All right. I love this picture, by the way. It's not a Eros thing. It's just a hot picture.
Beautiful. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, yeah. So, when we use the word intimacy, oftentimes we associate intimacy and sex together. But what we're trying to do here is point out that intimacy is this really big umbrella, which has a number of sort of like channels or modalities through which we experience intimacy. And one of those channels is through sex. And when Mark and I say sex throughout this entire webinar, that is a really big umbrella, right? We have narrowed down sex to be one penis that goes inside of one vagina. And we have a really big, broad, inclusive framework that involves the whole body, that sex is really the body, the mind, the soul, the psyche. And that when we'll use that term sex, but resist the urge to narrow it down to one penis and one vagina. There are sexual experiences where there are no penises involved, and ones where there are no vaginas involved, and ones in which different parts are exploring different parts. So it's a big umbrella. Intimacy is a big umbrella. And the two points I wanted to make here, my favorite definition, there's a number of definitions of intimacy. And one that I really like is from this really neat feminist writer named Katha Weingarten. And she defines intimacy as the co-construction of meaning that leads to coordinated action. So she really holds on to intimacy happens in the space between two people as they sort of co-create the meaning and then do something with that. So it can be really intimate to go for a walk if the meaning of it is, this is how we enter the space together, take care of our relationship, put our bodies in nature. It's mutual. It's not me twisting your arm and guilting you into a walk, but it's really the two of us, that word that Mark just used a little bit ago, of agreements. Like, it's an agreement. It's an entry together into agreement. And so our definition of sex really, or the idea of sexual intimacy, again, holds that idea of two people kind of creating this experience together, and that there's a coordination of the meaning. This is how we express ourselves to each other. This is how we nurture each other. This is how we tap into passion. And in that, if we're going to start to work on sex as being so much more than just two bodies doing stuff to each other, what we're getting into is the idea that intimacy involves vulnerability. So that's where that piece of into me see. So entering a sexual space is allowing yourself to be seen and taking the risk to see somebody else. So, and there's vulnerability in that, which is why a lot of what we're going to work on today is going to involve really understanding and deepening your connection with yourself, because the degree to which I am at home in my own skin is the degree to which I can enter a sexual space, which is a risky space, with myself fully present and meet you there. So we're going to do a little experience now, right?
A little Saturday morning, afternoon, maybe Sunday, depending where you are. Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay, so what we want you guys to do, this is an exercise I have now done with thousands of people. I really have. I've been doing this for a while, and I really like what it opens up. So wherever you are, get yourself real comfortable and close your eyes. And don't worry, it's pretty low level. It's just the mind travel. All the clothes stay on. We're not going really high.
Yeah, right.
No high risk.
Welcome to Webinar Group Sex.
So get yourself comfortable and close your eyes. If at any point, wherever you're going in your mind feels unsafe, icky, whatever, open your eyes, scroll your phone for a moment, whatever you need to do. But to the degree you can and feel safe, close your eyes and travel in your mind. What I want you to do is put yourself in your mind's eye in a situation that is sexual and that is good, a really good, positive sexual moment, sexual experience. It may be an experience that you have had. It may be an experience that you are imagining, sort of a fantasy. But take a moment and kind of locate yourself in a really good, positive sexual space with somebody, with some buddies, perhaps. And when you get there, I want you first to bring your awareness inside of yourself and explore what you're thinking, what you're feeling, both in your body and in your emotional space. And now bring your awareness outside of your own body and locate your awareness in your partner and see you through the eyes of your partner. How is your partner experiencing you in this really good, really positive sexual situation? And then bring your awareness to the space between you, or sort of the energy of the scene that you're in. Like kind of just hang out in the space between you and your partner and sort of experience, soak in, what does that space feel like? What's the energy of the space? Take a little notice of kind of like, what are the elements of the space that are creating that feeling? You know, like what's the scene? Sort of imagine what's in that really good, positive scene that's creating that energy that lives kind of in the space between you and in the space around you. And then when you're ready, come back to the here and now. And we want you just to take a few moments and write out that scenario in as much detail as possible, including the elements we highlighted, the thoughts and feelings you had, how your partner was experiencing you, how the space kind of looks and feels for you in that situation. So take a few moments now and do a little bit of writing about that. What do you think, Mark? Is that good enough time?
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you for the meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Took me on a journey. I got intimate for a second there.
Did
All
you?
right. So, yeah, and it was great.
You went, but now you're back.
Until you said, or them, and I was like, should I add someone? What's happening here? So if you guys have attended a previous webinar of mine, you know that I talk a lot about how we often frame the concept of change with the idea that I need to avoid an outcome, or I need to change something because I don't like the way things have been. But in the research on change, what's really evident is that people change when they're moving towards what they're going to experience. That when they move towards desired experiences. So in this statement that we have on this slide, when I become a love machine, I love that term. When I become a love machine, I look forward to. And so we want you to come up with, like, when you think about even that positive experience you just had in the meditation, but when you actually think about being fully connected, fully alive, fully orgasmic, fully intimate, fully stretched in that space, what do you look forward to feeling? And what do you look forward to creating? What is the context of what you want to create? And I actually want you to write these down. So I do want you to take the moment to do this, because this is the work. This is the part that's saying, I'm going to connect to things I've not thought of before, things that I maybe haven't really committed to. And when we write things down, we're more likely to do them too. So just take 1 second to do that. And if you're open to it, sharing in the chat box, make sure that in your chat box it says to all panelists and attendees, and sharing, like, what are some of the things you look forward to feeling or creating? Like feeling connected, feeling passionate, feeling alive, feeling orgasmic, feeling wet, feeling dry. I don't know. That's all the options. That chat box, I don't want it to be like crickets over there. Okay. So you guys can roll them in as you have them. All right. So
anybody who's read Loving Bravely or seen me talk anywhere knows that I freaking love both ands because they are so central to our existence as humans, and they force us to resist the urge to do what we so often do, which is foreclose on the really like the single story. We get really like sort of either or in our thinking. And so relationships, especially when we're talking about sexual expression in relationships, really demands of us that we find and hold a both and place where two things that seem contradictory or that seem difficult to hold on to at the same time are all true. And so one of the ways we'll sort of visit a number of both ands here, where we are inviting and challenging you to sort of go, rather than go like, if this, then this, go, if this, then also this, and maybe also this. Like where you just, where a really rich, holistic experience of your sexual self, I think a big part of that is a sexual self that can just tolerate a lot of stuff being true at the same time, rather than being like, my sexual self is this. Because if it's only this, then that means that all these other pieces can't also be brought in. So we're going to be sort of throughout this kind of inviting you to hold greater degrees of complexity. So sex is in some ways very simple, right? It's at the level of the body, at the level of the behavior. It's just stuff that people do to each other. Some combination of kissing, licking, rubbing, caressing, touching, putting in, taking out, right? It's very at the level of, like, you think about if like we were aliens, if there were aliens sort of like watching two humans have sex, like what would that look like? There's a real simplicity to it, right? Not a lot of degrees of complexity of sexual acts themselves. And at the very same time, it's pretty difficult to think of a behavior we can do that stirs up as much as sex stirs up in us. And I don't just mean orgasm, though that is certainly a like very powerful, right, full body and soul experience, but just how confronting sex is and can be. So there's this profound nature of sex, right? It's this behavior that's so profound that literally governments, right, make laws about what's okay and what's not okay and who can and who can't. So that's simple and profound at the same time. And then in terms of the erotic self, you know, Mark and my paradigm and the paradigm of, you know, sex therapists and therapists in general, people who are really invested in this work, is the idea that we all have a sexuality. We all have a sexual self or an erotic self. And our default setting is for that to just be an element, an essence of who we are. And that sexual energy really is the energy of possibility. It's the energy of creation. It's the energy of imagination. It's just kind of this like sex is a behavioral manifestation of energy. So it's real neutral, right? And it gets loaded up with tons of judgment, prohibition, fear, good and bad labeling. But it's our belief in the frame that we're going to be inviting you into that the default setting is that we just have, as part of living in a human form, we have a sexuality. We have this energy flows through us. We have choice about when and how we express it, but it just is a part of who we are. It is our birthright, and what Mark and I both get really passionate about is sort of like pushing back on these cultural constructs and really challenging, like, what if we didn't have to reclaim our sexuality? What if we just had access to it from the very beginning?
Oh, amen.
stayed integrated. Because what happens for so many of us, like Mark, you were saying in the beginning, it gets disintegrated from a number of things, from cultural conditioning, messages, from traumatic experience, where the sexual self kind of like goes way off to one side, and it feels scary, and it feels unknown, and it feels dirty, and it feels dangerous. So, I think a really beautiful part of self-awareness, of self-care, is sort of getting to know that sexual self. And that's
how fun is that?
How fun is, yeah.
What a great assignment, guys and girls. That's the first one. The first good assignment.
That's right. That's right. So sex is culturally bound. I love this diagram, sort of like mapping out the whole tree. Like you inherited, every one of us inherited from our government, from our political system, from our neighborhood, from our churches and mosques and synagogues, from our families. We inherited a shit ton of messages about sex. So many. And the messages we inherited are very much dependent on the time we're living. If we were having this conversation in like 1722, it would be a different kind of conversation.
We'd be dead.
We would also...
I would have died a long time ago, but we would be dead. You would have been burnt at a stake, probably.
For sure.
As a compliment, too. That's an absolute compliment.
That's right. And for sure, we wouldn't be using Zoom.
Yeah, right.
And if we were in a different part of the world, there would be different conversation. I have at Northwestern now in our graduate program, the last few years, we've started to have students who come to us from all over the world, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, China, Korea. And it's so fun and fascinating to talk with them about what their sex education was like.
So diverse. And that's why, it's so beautiful that it's beautiful. And Alexandra talked at the beginning about these things that can come up in us and we're like, oh shit, I didn't know that. I didn't know where that, or you learn things about you and there's a desire to want to go to shame or to go to guilt. And we're asking you to feel it. That's fine. But don't stay there because you don't need to. It's valuable information that we can use to move forward of why we show up in the ways we do. And because of that, we want you to take a moment with your paper to write down what were some of the messages that you received about relationships in the context of sex and intimacy in the following areas. So school, gosh, that was a big one for me. Communication, family, home, like what were you directly told, in the communication style of it, or even talking about it in the family home? Did you guys talk about it? Was there no boundaries around it and there was too much conversation? Friends, what were they like? What were their influences, even of their families? And of course, we have online and media are a massive influence potentially on us. And of course, our choice of, or maybe lack thereof sometimes, because we're born into our spiritual practices most of the time. So what were some of the messages you received from your churches or your religions too? So if you guys could take, just a couple minutes to write out some of these things. And I can give some examples, like for school, mine was, do not have it. Sex makes babies. Actually, that was pretty much the extent. And babies are bad unless you're married. Mm-hmm. They even actually had a young couple come in who got pregnant by accident. And part of their, I guess, penance was to have to come and tell us not to have sex because you become them.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, it was awful. That was like one of the first moments where I was like, I can't be on board with what's happening here. Like that was tough. That wouldn't hurt my heart for them. Yeah. So that's one of them. At home, pretty open dialogue about it, except for my mom's Irish and Catholic previously. And the sex talk was anything but a good sex talk. It did not prepare me for anything. So yes, those are some of those. So you guys take a couple minutes. Did you want to add anything, Alexandra?
I was going to just add in, I've been interested lately, in looking at like, okay, so what does sex education look like, in the US where, where I live. And one thing that I found recently that really kind of shook me and motivated me is that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, outlines 16 topics that ought to be in sex education. And then they surveyed schools state by state to figure out, okay, so like how many of these topics are you covering in your sex education? They found that 50% of high schools were covering all 16 topics, and 20% of middle schools were covering all 16 topics. So, and when you look at the CDC's list, it's all very like sort of basic biological, and a lot about focusing on preventing pregnancy, which of course, like we're all about, you know, making babies when you want to make babies and not making them when you don't want to make them. But it sort of is like, and it's very sort of biological, and obviously through the Centers for Disease Control, kind of focused on the physiology and the biology. And it really highlights what's not in there. Discussions of pleasure, discussions that are inclusive of sexualities beyond one man and one woman. So just sort of highlights everything that's not in there. And the big one that I think is really important when we talk about, well, any sort of sex is pleasure.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really interesting to think about why is that kept out? What's the power that comes from the silence around, the impact of the silence around any conversation about sex as pleasurable?
So much to unpack. This is fun. So yeah, if you guys take a couple seconds to write, now that you're revved up from what Alexandra said. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, because they might be helpful for other people too. And again, in the chat box, make sure that you're picking all panelists and attendees if you want to share anything.
I like those answers so far.
Mm-hmm. All right, if you guys, you should be able to raise your hand too. So if you're done, raise your hand, and then we can move forward. Yeah, there we go. Raise the roof, guys. I should have practiced the hand raising earlier. I remember that. All right. I think we're ready to go. So we have a poll. So we're going to launch this poll. So you guys can pick as many answers as you want. All right. Here we go. Is the poll showing up for you guys?
It is, yeah. Uh-huh.
You know, it wasn't discussed really for me. I had to learn how to use a condom from the show Degrassi. And they put it on a banana. Thank God for that. I'd have kids everywhere.
I remember the condom on the banana in my high school. I do.
Oh yeah, I watched it as Joey Jeremiah hooked up with I think her name was Camilla in the back of his Camaro.
That's funny.
A lot of sex has happened in Camaros, I'm sure. All right, guys, we'll give you another 10 seconds.
Boy, those last two are real powerful ones, right? All men want is sex. Women who have sex are slutty. Yeah. Those are messages that find their way in.
5 more. Okay, so we're ready. End poll. Let's share these results. Look at that. Oh, so 74% of people, and there's men and women on this, women who have sex and or are sexual or slutty. All men wanted sex. I mean, we hear that all the time. I heard that growing up all the time.
Mm-hmm. Those are the top two.
Yeah.
Highly gendered. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Almost a quarter, you'll go to hell if you have it.
Oh, man. All right. Now I get revved up over this subject, so we'll just I'll try to calm down as we move forward. Okay, so
what I love about naming the messages is it's like the first step to putting a little breath and space between you and the message, you know? And then you get to start making choices. All right, do I want to keep that message? Is it working for me? Is it enhancing me, growing me? Or is it constraining me and bringing me down? But you can't get there unless you do what we're doing with this slide, right? Like just naming it, putting it into the space so you can look at it and start to make some choice.
Yeah, and really be able to see too that we have there's such a normalization in a way. Like we all feel sort of like, am I the only one who feels this way? Where passive pressures come from, where the dialogue that's inside our head is because of some of these messages. So let's be exorcists of those messages that don't serve us. So this is really what we're sharing, is that sex can be really challenging, and that's normal. So in a study from David Schnarch, which I think I pronounced his name right. Schnarch. That's probably a better choice, but still awful name. He has interviewed, I think it was 20,000 couples, filled out surveys and questionnaires on a website, and 85% of them have sexual desire problems, always, usually, or sometimes. Only 15% rarely do. Isn't that crazy? So 35% always have sexual desire problems before they have sex. And we're going to talk about why the word before is there in a bit. Alexander's going to cover a bit of that. Another 25% usually do, and another 25% have it sometimes, 9% only rarely, and 6% never. Even the frequency of sex, it was 7% have it 4 or 5 times a week, and it was 25% have it once or twice a week. So it shows you, like, we think like a healthy couple has it 4 or 5 times a week, but the range of what healthy means is so vast. And we don't want to get into these definitions because the expectations create pain. They create the part where, like, whoa, is our relationship broken because? Mm-hmm. You know, sexual desire challenges, as we'll call them, they're normal to have, but they're really beautiful if we can pay attention to what's actually going on. And we're going to talk a little bit more about all of that.
Mm-hmm. I think we can get really locked into it's sort of like that either or simplistic thinking. We get really locked into the sort of quantity being that, like, if we stay above this threshold, we're okay. If we drop below this threshold, it means we're doomed. We're not going to last. Da, 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 da. So we can load up a lot into that quantity question, which leaves out the quality question. Mm-hmm. How much sort of like possibility, warmth, expression is captured in the experience, not just the sort of like, we did it, check it off, you know, we're going to be okay. So we tried to sort of unpack here a little bit about why in the context of an intimate relationship, and we're going to talk about some material in a little bit that's about sex, not in the context of an intimate relationship, but for here, we're just highlighting sort of in an intimate relationship, why does sex matter? Like, why is it important? Why is the sexual aspect of a couple's relationship important? Why does it matter? And one of the ones we listed here is that sex is more than sex. It is a portal or a gateway into all kinds of expression of self. And there's a lot of richness and possibility there. You know, there are some couples where their sexual practices together really are a gateway, not just to taking care of the relationship, self and other, but a gateway towards experiencing, you know, God or consciousness or something really spiritual. And so sex is the ancients were working on this idea, right? This is not a new idea of sex and spirituality, sex as a way of accessing God. I just was reading recently, a writer was saying, this is why at the moment of orgasm, many people say, oh my God, sort of this idea, big God energy can be there when there's really kind of present, open-hearted sexual expression. Second reason is sex is about dancing together. So a lot of times what's happening in the relationship will get played out in the bedroom. And so sexual dynamics can be unpacked, mind explored, for themes that have to do with who we are as a couple in general, around gender, around power, around pleasure, who has access to pleasure, around questions of, am I good enough? Do you love me? Are you here for me? Do I matter? Do you see me? So it's all of that kind of like dancing together stuff gets played out in sex, which is another reason why it matters, why it's meaningful. A third one is for couples who are choosing sexual monogamy, it's not a need that is met elsewhere then. Unlike, in my marriage, CrossFit, right? I don't do CrossFit with Todd. Todd tried it once and he said, it's nice to do something when you know it's the only time in your life you're ever going to do it. But my CrossFit doesn't threaten the relationship, right? It's something I can do out there with other people, and it has nothing to do with our marriage. In fact, it's good for our marriage because it's a way that I can sort of play and express and bring home an energized self. The list goes on and on, right? Knitting, football, whatever those activities are that if you and I don't like doing them together, we do them outside of the relationship and we come back home and talk about how it was. For couples who are choosing sexual monogamy, that's not within the parameters. So it matters, right? Something that needs to be worked on and addressed because it lives within the couple domain. And sometimes it's really the only thing that is purely saved for partners. And so it becomes, it has an immense amount of specialness and sacredness because it's something we only share with each other. It's a means of psychological repair. If the big overall calculation for making a relationship work is do more of the good stuff and do less of the bad stuff, enjoying sex together is in the category of the good stuff. Research shows, in fact, there's a study that indicated that when couples report that they're really pretty comfortable and happy and satisfied with their sex lives, they get about a 10 to 15% boost in their overall relationship satisfaction. But if the sexual relationship is painful or non-existent in a way that, sometimes sex is non-existent and both people are choosing that. And so then that's not an issue. But if one person's wanting it and the other, and it's not happening, if there's pain, disconnection around sexual relationship, it detracts about 50 to 70% of a relationship satisfaction score. So, and why else does it matter? Because people say that it does. So you've got up there in the corner some data from it's kind of a pretty old study at this point, but just that when people are surveyed, they say that it matters, that it's important because what we were saying before, it's a part of who we are. It adds a cushion. It is a way of escaping from the real world. It's one of the ways that adults play, one of the ways that we're still allowed to play as an adult.
Yeah, if we're allowed to.
Mm-hmm, if we're allowed to. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I love the idea of just normalizing this so that we can be like, oh, well, if we have desire challenges, we're not broken. And God, I really do want sex. And I remember reading a meme that said, if someone doesn't believe in God, ask them during orgasm. So when you were saying they all say it when people say it when. So in the context of sex, there's casual sex is pretty readily available in our world today. And, we have apps that are designed to connect it. And there's a lot of conundrums that end up being part of casual sex. I'll talk a little bit about what some of the gender differences are in a bit, but there's a lack of emotional familiarity. So really and you don't need to read this slide. I'm going to go through it, so don't get caught in there. But, there's going to be a lack of emotional safety. And for some of us, that might be a bit of a turn on in a weird way. But it also can be a place where we don't feel open to being seen fully. And they don't know us. There's not like not just an emotional familiarity, but parts about our own vulnerabilities during sex and intimacy that they wouldn't have information about that makes us feel better, or erogenous zones. There's generally a lack of sobriety. And, I think that may be one of the most common things about this is that we we tend to have to anesthetize ourselves a little bit to do it. And that's never really a great thing to be part of a connection, but it usually is an experience. I did it in college all the time, so this is not a space of judgment. Difficulty in asking for what you want and need. Because there's that lack of familiarity, it's pretty challenging to say like, hey, move right a little bit, or, we fear actually asking to get our needs met. Again, though, in the context of casual sex, that's where some people will ask for what they need because there's no long-term risk or experience with this person. So they'll be their most vulnerable, authentic selves, which I'll get to where that can come from. There's a high level of risk. There can be, depending on what we're choosing. Are we using protection? We don't know their sexual history. We don't know all of these different things. Not to mention we might be putting ourselves in scenarios that are risky based on that. And it can be an avoidance strategy. We can be using intimate experiences as a way to have fleeting romances where we feel validation and we feel loved and seen. But we are in control of the length of that, the depth of that vulnerability and the length of the encounter. So it can be an avoidance strategy. And how I was saying before that sometimes we will ask for what we need in that because we could sort of like be our most vulnerable, authentic selves. And you see this a lot when people travel and they hook up, right? Because they're about to go away again in the next day or that week. So they can fully unfold. And then, of course, you end up falling in love with some Italian guy. And, now you got to write him some emails and texts after and try and pursue him again. But in the last part, bait and switching, that's a term that we used to use in sales, that we'd be like, hey, come in and we have this TV, it's $500, but then it wouldn't be in stock when you got there. So you'd have to buy the more expensive model. And these mismatched intentions, this idea that I'm open to casual sex. I'm good with being a friends with benefits. I'm no problem being, a one night stand. But deep down, we actually want a relationship. And so what can happen is we say we don't, we get involved, and then we try to switch it. Well, like where we're like, oh, wait, I do want a relationship. I do want this experience. And so it can be this way of matching the other person's intention of casual sex in order to meet them, in order to get them, at least for a moment. Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add, Alexandra?
No, I think that was all really good and helpful. And I really like how you are talking all that through without judgment. You're not saying casual sex is awesome or casual sex is terrible. It's about you're highlighting some of the risks, and that sets us up then to talk later on about what does self-aware, consciously chosen, consciously crafted casual sex look like.
Yeah, we'll get more into the details of how that all pieces together. How do you have a casual sex? I don't want to say conscious casual sex, but like more aware, responsible, safe casual sex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Before I start this, I want to just loop back because Mike put on the comments here. He's a little bit lost with the sexual monogamy and the CrossFit, knitting, etc. ways of release. Not sure where you went with that. My point was just for couples who are choosing sex is another reason why sex matters. It's important that couples, I think sometimes it can feel shameful to work on your sexual relationship with each other. And it can feel like if we're not perfectly synced, that can feel shameful. But it's another way of saying like it's worth investing in. It's worth, it's another reason why it's worth investing in, because sex is an essential aspect of who we are. And if we're choosing sexual monogamy, we are only expressing the sexual self within the crucible, the container of our partnership, of our marriage. So it means that we have to work on it with that partner. Versus, CrossFit is a little bit silly for us to keep going back to, but versus CrossFit, rather than being like, Todd, in order to make this marriage work, you have to do CrossFit. No, he doesn't. I can go out there and do CrossFit, but I can't. If we're going to choose sexual monogamy and I'm not happy with where Todd and I are sexually, he's the one I need to turn to in order to do that work. Mark, would you say it any differently or more? Do you feel like
the idea of being able to, you don't have an alternative in the context of a sexually monogamous relationship. So the turn towards the communication, in essence, getting deeper, more vulnerable in the dance of monogamy, that it matters because there's no other outlet. in the context of an intimate relationship. And I think if you were to even further that idea of like going and doing knitting and CrossFit and those things, that's where we'll talk a little bit later about how that really is how you maintain who you are as an individual in monogamy. And you can still go deeper within your sexual self in that relationship. We'll get into that though. And we're happy that helped, Mike.
Yeah.
All right. So what are some of the relational challenges?
Yeah. Okay. So, so this is sort of highlighting, some of the, I mean, this list could be on and on, but we sort of pulled out 7 that we thought were particularly salient or common that we hear about a lot in terms of relational sexual challenges. One is just difficulty talking about sex because of what we were saying before about like, maybe you saw a condom being rolled in a banana, but you certainly didn't learn in school how to say, I really love when you give me oral sex like this, or, you know what, I really would love to kind of play around with this fantasy. Would you be available to listen to it? We just don't, oftentimes it's difficult to talk about sex. Sometimes we're loaded up. We come into our intimate relationships loaded up with guilt, shame, and possibly even misinformation. So it's this kind of confusing message, right? Sex is bad. You'll end up with like genital warts and a baby you don't want and and sinning against God. And then you get into the sort of like now sex is okay and you're supposed to be a love machine. And that can be really confusing. It's not like turning off a light, like, okay, now all that stuff is gone and now I can just fully inhabit this space. So that can be one of the challenges. Desire can be diminished in a relationship by non-sexual problems, things that have nothing to do with how each partner feels about each other, but ways in which the stress of the world enters in and affects what happens sexually for couples. Things like work stress or family stress or side effects of medication or having little babies or teenagers, like sort of all of the challenges of living in a family system. You know, family life and erotic life are really sort of like nary the two shall meet. So one of the challenges can be just switching over from being part of a family system to being erotic partners. And that can be another challenge. The fourth one is desire discrepancies. When, one person really would like to have sex, multiple times a week and the other partner really doesn't experience desire at that same level. And so that can lead to all kinds of importing of stories. If you love me, you would. And if you love me, you wouldn't. If you love me, you'd have sex with me more often. If you love me, you wouldn't ask me to have sex more than what I'm saying I want. It's a very common one. The fifth one is the impact of sexual trauma. So the numbers, about a quarter of women and somewhat less men, but still a significant number. 1/6 of men live with sexual trauma. And so we are not saying here that survivors of sexual trauma can't have beautiful sexual expression. They of course can, but that very often requires work, addressing, healing, recovering, creating an intimate partnership where our intimate partners are our allies in healing, in sexual healing, and journeying kind of back home to our bodies. Sexual fantasy and activity incompatibilities. I heard about this app called Kindu, Kindu. It's a swipe-based app that offers couples, each person puts it on their phone, and it has a menu of swipe-based options of like, what would you be up for? And you swipe right if it sounds like fun. You swipe left if it's like, meh, not so much. So, and it provides then the couple with sort of like a menu of what they're both interested in. And there's of course lots of books that also, where couples can just explore what would you be interested in trying and what would you be interested in trying. And sometimes there can be obviously pain around, just emotional pain around if they feel really incompatible around sexual explorativeness. And then porn. So, porn in and of itself is neither a helper nor a hinderer, right? For some couples, they use erotic materials in a way that really helps them offload shame, drop into their bodies, kind of fuel their sexual energy, fuel creativity and play. And for some couples, it's a source of tremendous pain when it becomes a wall between partners. Usage starts to feel kind of just compulsive or instead of, where it becomes kind of a barrier to intimacy rather than a facilitator of intimacy.
All right, so we're going to launch a poll, guys and girls. We would love for you to just mention, like, what are some of the challenges that you guys experience? I know I for sure grew up with the difficulty talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Guilt, shame, misinformation. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing just that experience of like families not talking about it and churches not talking about it and schools not talking about it. It makes it so difficult to be a subject to navigate because we have no example, no tools.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So 10 more seconds, guys.
And it can stir up all kinds of vulnerability, like to saying, this is what I want. I want this, like to lay claim to something that you want it's vulnerable. Putting yourself in the ring.
All right, here they are.
Oh, wow.
Difficulty talking about it, yeah. Guilt, shame, misinformation. And it's amazing when you have any of the things that are, after number 2, guilt, shame, misinformation. Just the fact that their number 1 exists makes all the rest of them pretty challenging to communicate about.
That's right. Number 1 is kind of like the entryway into dealing with any of those other challenges.
So when we talked about the messages that you guys received growing up, we really want to reiterate how important it is to understand those, because when you have such a hard time saying like, hey, move left, it feels better when you do this, or I really miss us right now and I don't feel connected, just to be able to understand, just to have compassion for yourself, to know like, of course you're afraid to talk about it. No one talked about it. Yeah. Like when I think about that, I'm like, whoa, at least now I can meet the part of myself that has, throughout most of my life, up until recently, had a really hard time saying that feels better, or that what I'd really like to do is this. Because out of the context of casual sex, it's a lot, it feels more risky, more vulnerable to be rejected in this vulnerable request and desire. Now, of course, if someone said, move left to me, I move left quick, you move left quick, right? And I give this example all the time about communicating needs in relationships, where I say, like, you can either tell someone how to do something well and build a customized cunnilingus fellatio machine, or you can just leave them down there stumbling. And there's no person who's ever done oral who hasn't been like, I don't want to be here for another 75 minutes. Like my jaw is broken. My tongue stopped working. Like we all know this feeling. So I make a joke of it because I think we all have this understanding of what it can be like, but that the way out is really simple. It just requires an immense amount of courage.
That's right. Well, and I love the example of go left. Dr. Tammy Nelson, who's a speaker and teacher about sex, and I really like her work. I think sometimes what keeps us from saying, especially maybe for women who are having sex with men, a constraint may be, I'm afraid of hurting their feelings. And so it's very different to be like, don't do that, I hate it. Of course, that potentially is hurtful and unkind. Mm-hmm. But I love when you do this. So really focusing on, I want more of this thing that you do that feels so good and right to me. So there's something about languaging it in a way that really invites, like, I love this, I want more. And then when we think about the poll, that first poll, which was the top message was women who enjoy sex are sluts. It makes total sense why it's really difficult for women, especially perhaps, to say, I love when you do this, it feels so good. Because the whole training was, totally. If you say that, you are, what does that say about you?
Yeah, if you actually love sex, then you're a slut. Like that's the message, which is awful. So we're here, we're excising. Is that the right term for being an exorcist? We're excising these things.
Love it.
Okay, so getting into I get really nerded out on this because this is some of the research that I love. Now, are there differences between men and women? Now, there are more differences between men and between women in the range of each gender than there are between the genders. But we often go with like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, but actually a lot of women are from Mars and a lot of women are from Venus and a lot of men are from Mars and there's so much range. And so as soon as you can stop trying to put yourself in a box and let yourself feel your box, I was about to get really dirty there. So the
landmines are everywhere. The double
it really is
everywhere.
So first off, the left and right hemisphere of a female brain is actually more interconnected. And this difference begins in puberty, in your teenage years. And it is posited that that is from estrogen's effect on the brain versus testosterone's effect on the brain. But you could also argue that it's likely due to socialization too, because when you look at the research on how someone handles a baby they think is a boy versus a baby they think is a girl, they handle them very differently. So what creates the interconnection, there's so many confounding factors. It could be how they're socialized. And so this advantage, though, provides the ability for women to be sort of like better communication and emotional ninjas. Oxytocin is released during breastfeeding, during childbirth, and during orgasm. So in casual sex, oxytocin is a bonding hormone, and in sex, it's released for men and women. But during sex and orgasm, men also release testosterone. So testosterone actually suppresses the effect of oxytocin. So that's why after a woman has sex, she tends to potentially catch feelings a little more readily or easily, and a man, because it's more suppressed. So you do have to be careful, mind your oxytocin, as they would say. Mm-hmm. And so we do have this sort of heteronormative idea that men want sex and women want babies and connection and commitment. But I was reading some research earlier this morning that was blowing my mind that I had to mention, because it was like, really, if you think of this context, like imagine if you were raised thinking that women want sex just as much as men. And I think for all the women on here, like, you want to raise your hand? Do you feel like you want to? You know, I think it's a pretty common thing. But imagine if that's how we're socialized. And so Kim Whalen, I don't know how to say her name, but she's a psychologist. And she noticed that in rhesus monkeys, when they're in a cage, they end up being all about sex, right? Because they're right beside each other, and the male initiates more. But when they raise the size of the cage, much like in the wild, the women are actually the ones who pursue the males and choose the partners and initiate the sex by following them around and touching them. And really, when you look at this, you see how the cage removed the mating ritual, which is much like the idea of Esther Perel's book, Mating in Captivity. This idea that when we feel, and we're going to go more into this, but when we feel like we're suppressed, perhaps that's something that makes it so the male initiates more. But I thought that was really fascinating, how just that difference. So if you think like women are more initiators, women can be and desire sex more, that would really change the way we really look at things. Mm-hmm. But now there's another really massive difference that's going to lead to the next part, which is in a study from Queen's University from, what's Shiver's first name? We'll send you a link to all this stuff, so it doesn't matter. But so here's how it worked out. There were gay men. Now get excited about this, because this is actually really awesome.
I love the study.
There were gay men, there were straight men, there were lesbians, and straight women. So there were all types. And they were shown gay male sex, lesbian sex, straight sex, a man masturbating, a woman masturbating, a chiseled dude walking down the beach with his dong out, but he was flaccid, so it wasn't that exciting. And then a fit, naked woman exercising. She was doing calisthenics, I believe is the word they use. And then bonobos humping. So quite a range, right? Like pretty much every range. I mean, the monkey sex, I don't think anyone would add to the repertoire. But what they looked at was, you got to choose. So, the gay men, the straight men, the lesbian women, the straight women, they got to choose, does this turn me on? So they click, oh, yeah, hot, right? But then there was also a machine called, I think a plethysmograph, right? It was hooked up to the genitals of the men and the women, And it saw like, oh, what are you really aroused about? That was the idea. Was there going to be a difference between what I click to and what I'm aroused by? And in the men, what they said their orientation was very much matched what they were aroused by. So straight men were aroused by heterosexual sex, lesbian sex, women masturbating, the chick doing exercise, and not the porn, the monkey porn. Women, what they clicked, they liked, and what actually aroused their erogenous zones was gay male sex, lesbian sex, straight sex, man masturbating, woman masturbating, woman doing calisthenics, and monkeys humping. The only thing that did not cause, and this is, like lubrication, swelling of the genitals, those types of responses, was the chiseled dude walking with a limp, with a flaccid wiener. So that's kind of crazy, right? Because you would think like, so there was more non-accordance is the word they use in the research between what they say they were turned on by and what was actually turning them on. So this really changed what we think about female arousal, and that they are somehow separate. And I don't think we actually get into this specifically, so I just want to mention it. And some of the theory behind that is that women historically, over vast amounts of time, didn't always get to choose whether they actually had a sexual partner. Not to mention that, some research may possibly indicate that they would have more than one sexual partner in a row to maximize the possibility of actually producing offspring. So the idea was that the actual genitals respond in a way as a survival mechanism too. That if you weren't ready to be penetrated, then you might end up with a wound and then get an infection and die. So some of it was just really, you can ask questions if you want. Please put in the two, all panelists and attendees, so other people can ask questions or see your questions. So that's really fascinating. Do you have anything to say to that, Alexandra?
No, I think that I'm glad that we're going to send the article, because it really is rich. This piece at the end about sort of the evolutionary advantage of having arousal be able to happen, having genital response happen, whether or not there's actual, I'm really enjoying myself right now, has powerful implications around just women who are survivors of sexual violence and men who are survivors of sexual violence, when sometimes genitals have responded during sex that was very much not wanted. And that can be another thing that heaps on loads of shame around, survivors of sexual violence are loaded up with so much shame anyways, and that can be another piece of it, is that my body responded. And so one of the things I love about the contribution of this piece of work is it gives us some insight into why, as you're saying, that there's that evolutionary advantage to having a body that can respond really swiftly with lubrication. And it's I think it's really just a really rich, interesting study.
Well, and to know that arousal doesn't always mean you're excited, from a psychological sense. Which, let's get into that, Alexandra.
Okay. So, the field of sex therapy has been around for lots of years now, since the 50s and 60s, with Masters and Johnson and Kinsey, and they've been doing research for years. And one of the first sort of contributions of studying people's sex lives was starting to understand, what is the human sexual response cycle? So this is a model that was used for a very long time to describe the human sexual response cycle. And their notion, this diagram here, is that desire comes first, desire being a little a sort of feeling dang, I'd like some sex right now, the desire to enter a sexual experience, I gotta get me some sex. Desire being the first step. Then arousal, which is the body responding. Then plateau. Then orgasm, for those who are very lucky. More orgasms. And then resolution. So that was the model of the human sexual response cycle that was used in teaching, in research, in medical offices to define how humans ought to be sexually. And whenever you have a model that shows how it ought to go, when you have people who vary from that, that's how you define pathology or dysfunction, right? Things going wrong. And so what started to happen was that there were a number of people who were getting diagnosed with pathologies in their sexual response cycle, and they tended to be women kinds of people. And it was because they were saying that they either don't have desire or arousal comes first and then desire. Basically, they were not following this linear pathway in quite the same way. And so then as you've had some other researchers entering the field and kind of shaking up this notion of maybe not everybody follows this diagram and maybe there are multiple pathways, what we ended up with are models that look more like this. Which when I show this in a talk, inevitably there's like a collective gasp, I think especially the men in the audience, like,
right.
But it's not, as Mark was saying, it's not, there are more variations within men and within women than there are men versus women. But basically, this is called the female sexual response cycle. So I'm going to explain it, well, basically in terms of the female sexual response cycle, this is a researcher named Basson, and she came along and she was like, you know what we're finding, especially for women, especially women who are sexually monogamous, especially for women who are sexually monogamous and have been with one partner for a while, desire is either only sometimes present or rarely present, or arousal comes first and then desire. And so actually for women, especially women in long-term relationships with one partner, there are multiple pathways in. It might be emotional intimacy, a really great conversation where I feel seen, heard, and understood opens me to a sexual experience. It might be sexual stimuli, which is probably why 50 Shades of Grey sold 1.1 gazillion copies. Some sexual stimuli that kind of triggers, oh yeah, I like that, I'm into that. Emotional and physical satisfaction. So feeling connected, feeling low stress. So this idea of, rather than thinking that it has to be, I want sex, now I'm aroused, like this sort of like linear right down the row, that there are multiple pathways in. And what it allows us to get into is this idea that I think is tremendously helpful, which is thinking about sort of naming two kinds of desire: spontaneous desire and responsive desire. Spontaneous desire is that sort of like, I would like sex, and let me see what I can do to make sex happen. It's sort of spontaneous, driven by cues from the inside, a feeling, a tingling in the loins that drives and motivates sex. Responsive desire, I love this analogy that I'm sure is from Emily Nagoski, because Emily Nagoski has been like the queen, this model, and just, I think it's a massive contribution to the world. Mm-hmm. Responsive desire goes like this. It's like your friend calls you up or texts you and is like, let's go to a party. And you're like, oh, I'm already in my comfy pants. I don't have any makeup on. Like, oh, really? But then you get your makeup on, you turn some fun music on, and you're like, okay, I can do this. And you go to the party, you have a great time, and you're so glad you did. That's responsive desire. That it's not, the first cue is somebody cueing you, or a setting or a scene cueing you. And the first thought may be like, oh, but then based on a number of factors, I trust my body, I trust my partner, I know I'll feel good after, I deserve this. You get over the hump, and then you're glad that you did. So that's responsive desire. And what I think is so important about this is it just normalizes it. It's not like spontaneous desire is here and responsive desire is here, and you are better if you have this and you're worse if you have this. It's not. These are two pathways. And then if a couple has, one is more like this and one is more like this, now we're open to infinite possibility about how we work with that difference, versus you're sick, bad, wrong because you're like this. Well, you're sick, bad, wrong because you're like this.
And we will definitely be sending Emily Nagoski's TED Talk to you guys. We absolutely love her work. So she has a really great book called Come As You Are, which we'll also send in the link of follow-up, obviously, along with Alexandra's book. And the idea of she's saying is like the process of really becoming aroused involves turning on the ons and turning off the offs, and that it's this dual, sort of symbiotic experience. And I like that because it's like your turn on's not broken just because you have turn offs, but they can sometimes outweigh sort of like a scale or a teeter-totter. And so a desire for sex has a lot to do with context, because if you think historically, even that experience that you went to in the meditation, you thought about, okay, what was going on? What did I feel? How did they feel? But there was something about those moments that made it, yes, like a green light. And when there's red lights there, that's also important to take into account what it means. And so when we're talking about like spontaneous versus responsive, and in this context of turning on the on and off the offs, the ons are sort of thought like the accelerator. That's what she calls them, the gas, and the offs being the brake. And really what this is your brain is coding everything in your environment, everything in your experience, including going on in your life right now, as either a turn on or a turn off. And this is exactly like how we do when we're approaching, I was going to say a stranger, but I'm talking about in the context of non-sexual experience, is that our amygdala already decides that something is a threat within a fifth of a second. So we are coding things constantly as this is positive, this is a green light, this is a red light. And sometimes the things that are green lights aren't necessarily healthy green lights, and sometimes things that are red lights don't necessarily help us because they're not, they're getting in the way of this experience in the moment. Not to invalidate them, because they're important to acknowledge and understand. But some of us have really sensitive gas pedals, and some of us have really sensitive brakes. But in the research, it's sort of seen that most of us sit in the middle of the bell curve. Most of us sort of have like an average gas pedal and an average brake. Do you want to add anything, Alexandra?
No, I think it's really helpful. You're doing,
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything here, because I love this way of thinking about it. So
I know what I would add. It's the idea of, right, sort of like, what do you code? I think you said this, but what do you code as sexually relevant? What are the things in the outside world or the internal world that your brain codes as sexually relevant that motivate you towards? And the red lights are, what are the things that your brain codes as like shut her down, not sexually relevant? Yeah, X.
Stop. No, don't. I think of that from New Girl, the show. It's such a good show.
I just discovered a new, I may have mentioned it later, but I just discovered a new break last night. I was playing Yahtzee. We were playing Yahtzee last night, family Yahtzee. That's a big break for me with Todd, like competing with him around Yahtzee. Not really drawing me.
So foreplay is not board games against... it's interesting, because when you think about the context of accelerators, what are your turn-ons and sexually relevant information? It can be anything. Yeah. It really can be anything. And it could be things that you're like, whoa, why do I find that hot? And so it can be something like a lit candle in this picture. It could be lingerie, it could be acts of kindness, it could be kissing, it could be love languages, it could be even PowerPoint presentations. They're a bit of a turn on for me. I'm not turned on in this moment, but it's working for me. So just in that context, so I want you to take a moment and just think of, like, if you were to go back to the experience that you had. All right, Alexandra, do you want to walk through that?
Yeah, well, just going back to the experience. So it may be something that you pull from the meditation at the beginning of the talk, but really you're trying to, so if you imagine like what that setting was, what that scene was, kind of go back through it. And now that you have this language of accelerators, what your brain codes as like, yes, bringing me more into a sexual space, go back through that image, that scene, and see if you can pick up some of those accelerators. And they tend to be sensory, like what you're hearing, smelling, engaging with, seeing, that your brain was coding as, yes, more, let's keep going.
So yeah, just take a moment to write them down. This is important information to take the time to gather. Mm-hmm. You're essentially like creating a list of that you could just hand to your partner. Like, yo, take care of this. No Yahtzee.
Back to the Yahtzee. My first thought was it's competition pushes me away from Todd. But it wasn't that, because I think that it would be a accelerator to go like play basketball with him. So it's not competition. It was because I think basketball, I know I'm not going to win, but it would still be sort of playful. But that Yahtzee, man, I think I just maybe get too intense with the Yahtzee.
I think that would probably be a big break for Kai with board games, because I get so competitive.
Yeah.
But I also talk a lot of trash. So I think the trash talk would be a non-sex talk. That would be, I'm not going to own a break for her, but I would imagine when I do that, when she tells me to find humility in a game, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be touching a boob anytime.
Pretty sure she's like, I am closing up on the inside
pretty sure she's going to have an iron bra on after that.
That's funny.
All right, so we're going to do a poll. All right, you guys ready? What are some of your accelerators?
This was fun to come up with, right? We have no freaking idea. We just had to come up with some stuff. But
I'll give you some of mine. Obviously, R&B bump and grind tunes. Country music, not really. There's an album from Alan Jackson I really like, but I don't know. It'd be hard for me to get down to Alan Jackson. So bump and grind, R&B really is. I love R&B music. Like, you throw some Usher on in the background.
Yeah.
Shit. When I feel connected, yeah, that for sure, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I think also feeling really good in myself, in my own body, in my own, how I feel about me is massive.
Mm-hmm. So that's a big one for me too. And I have had, I think for many, many women and lots of men too, this idea of like, if I weigh X number of pounds, or if I look this kind of a way, I'm going to feel more sexy. And I'm going to be more willing to go there or excited to go there. But it's not just that. It's also just massive self-love as you are. And really trusting that our partner's stories of our bodies are far more generous than our own stories of our bodies. I think that's a big one.
Oh yeah, body image. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so here's the results. So 100% of you said when we feel connected. And that's definitely not a shocking. I put in there, okay, so second was feeling beautiful, sexy, confident. And then what was the next one? When he or she tells me I'm beautiful, or whatever version of that. That could be you're handsome, you look good today, God, you're sexy, that kind of stuff. I like that when I see him or her doing chores around the house. Yeah, shit, that'll turn someone on.
There's research on that.
Yeah, and the research shows that when men do male gendered role tasks and women do female gender role tasks, that those people actually have more sex. Isn't that interesting? Like when a man vacuums, he gets less sex than when he takes out the garbage.
Oh.
I know, right? I'm sorry. The difference was subtle, so.
Yeah.
I like that the people are into the R&B. So the one where he or she wears a mascot outfit, that's a fetish actually that's called being a furry, I believe. And I saw it on the show Entourage, where Johnny Drama hooks up with a girl and she makes him wear a mascot outfit. And the reason we add this is like your turn-ons might be things that feel like they're not okay culturally or socially or whatever. But there are many fetishes, many things that turn people on. And there's no judgment about a fetish. It's just more understanding why you might have it and what it can be an escape from. But it can also be a way that you find connection. I don't want to judge if someone likes certain things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, there's also some breaks. This is from one of our favorite movies. So it's so good, this movie.
The diapers, the tantrums, the homework, the state capitals. Suddenly all you're aware of is that it's virtually impossible to French kiss a person who takes the new roll of toilet paper and leaves it resting on top of the empty cardboard roll. God forbid he takes the 2 seconds to actually replace it. Does he not see it? Does he not see it?
So I had a roommate who would, I mean, I wasn't turned on by him, but he would always leave the toilet paper roll, the new one, on top of the, fucking drove me nuts. That would be a turn off for me, a
That
break.
would be a break for you.
Yeah, so she talks about the accelerators and the brakes. So what are some of, they could be things like being stressed, kids, just a task list. A to-do list could be a turn on and it could be a turn off. You know, and lack of emotional sexual safety, fidelity. You know, I think if we're in relational agreements, when those relational agreements are being broken, it's really hard to feel connected and safe to open up to our partner. So even when you think of that, like context of my desire really drops when, how you finish that sentence is really important to get to know what your breaks are. And if all your brakes are pressed, it doesn't matter how many chocolates or candles or flowers or whatever you're going to get if your foot is firmly on the brake, even with the emergency brake up. So we do want to see what are some of your guys' brakes.
Yeah, so again, brakes are what your brain codes as shut her down, not going there.
So we did talk a little bit about them. So anger, resentment, for sure. Fear for me has been a big one. Fear of being hurt, fear of being loved, fear of bad smells. That's a hard one not to click yes to.
And Emily Nagoski's book, she writes about a gal with really sensitive brakes who just was like very temperature sensitive. So I don't remember if she had to have socks on or socks off or the room warm or the room cold. But just, again, we think of like the brakes being these 5 sensory kinds of things where the things need to kind of be lined up in your sensory world to open you. And so if you're feeling too hot or too constrained, or that can really be like hard to then make the shift to opening to sex.
All right, so we'll do 5 more seconds. All right. Yeah, the connected part is the big one. And isn't it amazing? It's like almost all of us. For both the turn-ons and the turn-offs. The break-in, it shows you that they can be both. You can have your foot on both at the exact same time based on connection. Bad smell, these are all pretty high.
Anger,
except for to-do lists. Their body either, and we would have thought that another person's body would drive someone's reason for desire as a cultural assumption. Okay.
The really high number around not feeling connected fits with the data about hookup sex. Hookup sex tends to not be really high quality sex. Like rates of orgasm for women in a hookup are just right around like 10%. And actually for men, it wasn't that much higher. The men, it's around 35%. So it doesn't, it's just a reminder of how very connected our heads, our hearts, and our genitals really are.
And it's amazing how many assumptions we make about today's kids or teenagers or millennials or whatever, that there's far more casual sex than there ever was, but there actually isn't. The data shows that they don't have more sexual partners. The people having sex are having a lot of it, clearly.
Right.
But the actual people with there's no more partners now today, even with all the access we have, and the cultural openness to giving the answer that you do have more sexual partners. Because back in the day, you would have been like 5, 12, right? Like people would have hidden that, although I think men round higher and women round lower. Which is interesting. Okay, so yeah, Alex.
So all of this talk about the brakes and the accelerators and the different pathways to desire, kind of bring it home with this idea that really great sex sits at the intersection of being grounded within yourself and connected to your partner. We love how Esther Perel, who we'll put some of her stuff in the materials as well, but it's hard to imagine people who haven't heard of her at this point, because she really has just busted out and she's everywhere doing such really important and fascinating work, but the way that she talks about this paradox of being grounded within myself and deeply connected to my partner is she talks about sex as two conversations at once. In one conversation is that, how am I doing? Like, am I in my body, or am I thinking about my to-do list? Am I in my body, enjoying my body, or am I judging my body? So that grounded space is mindful. It has a present moment focus, and it's super duper non-judgmental of self, being sort of at peace within yourself. And then the connected part is being open to the energy that's flowing between you and your partner, and just letting yourself kind of feel attuned to and connected to your partner. And so it's two conversations at once. And when we slip out of either one of those conversations, it can affect the quality of the experience, right? So if I slip out of my grounded space, and I start either dissociating, like sort of leaving my body, getting judgmental, sex can start to feel, or if I get hyper-focused on my partner's experience, sex can start to feel either kind of like numbed out or really performative, right? Like, I'm just here for you. If I'm not grounded in me and I'm hyper-focused on how you're doing, sex becomes performance. And that's going to probably compromise pleasure and just sort of shift that dynamic, right? From the two of us creating this experience to me making sure you're okay. And then the other way we might slip out of it is if we slip out of that connection, and then sex becomes sort of like masturbation with somebody else there, right? If I'm so lost in my own experience and my pleasure and getting my needs met, and I lose sort of being synced up with my partner, sex may not be particularly connective because I'm sort of lost in my own world, and it sort of is using somebody else is not the best way. Because sometimes we are using our partner's body to kind of enhance our pleasure, and it's being used in a really lovely way. But when it's not kind of in a connected way, it can then feel like you're just sort of like masturbation with somebody else, in the room.
And that doesn't feel good.
Anything else you'd add to that?
No, it's beautiful, but I love this e-card. So they handcuffed me and said, anything you can say and will be held against you in the law. It's Channing Tatum. So good. A good Channing Tatum joke never fails.
That's right. You always gotta have, any good webinar includes Channing Tatum humor. So this is so coming back to a both and, this idea that sex, I feel like we've said it at this point, sex is the body and the mind. So really honoring that. And that sex this is another idea from David Schnarch. Again, we talked about him before with some of the research about desire, that sex is friction and fantasy. So he has a model, he calls it the quantum model. Sort of like, quantum physics is when energy can be both a particle and a wave at the very same time. And here it's the idea that friction, sort of like stuff that feels good, and fantasy, the kind of like emotional, cognitive, imaginative elements, they move back and forth between them. And so at either extreme, like you can have something that feels technically good. It ought to feel like the technique that's being used, the friction is just right, so it ought to feel good. But if the mind variables aren't right, we're going to code it as not good. So either like it's technically perfect, but I'm really mad at my partner, so it's not going to feel pleasurable. Or it's technically perfect, but I don't feel safe, so my brain is not going to code it as pleasurable, fun, safe, enhancing. Or the other way around, where the mind elements, like the example of somebody who gets as turned on or more turned on giving their partner oral sex, in some ways makes no sense, right? Because there's no giving oral sex, arguably isn't the same like friction, right? Sort of quality of arousal based on being touched. But if the mind piece, the fantasy piece is really powerful, like whatever the story is about, like when one person pleasures their partner, that may be an incredibly erotic, charging, enjoyable thing for the person who's doing the giving. Not based on the friction, but based on the fantasy, whatever the fantasy that one person inhabits when they're the giver of pleasure. So we bring this up, that sort of both and, to just invite, again, just greater complexity, greater degrees of complexity of what's going on in an experience. And the idea, the last point there, that good sex rests on relational self-awareness, and good sex grows relational self-awareness. So this idea that the more we think about, write about, learn about our sexuality, the more we can bring that, we can create really positive sexual experiences. And the more we create positive sexual experiences, those grow us. We learn about ourselves. By experiencing and trying and growing sexually, like that shifts us as people and grows us as people. So those are the points there.
Oh, yeah, I could have put those points up. All right. So I love this title, Banging with Boundaries.
Great segue.
Yeah, how do we bang with boundaries? How do we go from both and? How do we both bang and have boundaries? Because I think that's really the key to this short-term friends with benefits, all that kind of stuff, is this idea that first, I'm really not a big believer that first dates should ever include really more than one drink. I think coffee's a better choice, or something where you have an ending and that you can prolong if you'd like to. I always give that advice to people. But alcohol in moderation, as soon as you have to anesthetize anything to do it, it's not really a safe choice. There's a way that we're numbing and avoiding ourselves in order to participate in something. And I've done that. It doesn't feel great. And so that's why I put that, we put that point in there, because, well, my mess ups most of life. And consent is sexy. Even being able to make the request means you care. To even have that conversation vulnerably out there, to be open to hearing a no, that is sexy. To be open to hearing, like, what feels good for you. Where do you want to go tonight? What are your boundaries in terms of intimacy with me, and vice versa? And that could come from both the male and female side. That it's important that it comes from both sides. This conversation, this idea of what I'm okay doing today is, and what I'm not okay doing is. And it's interesting too, because when we get in the moment, sometimes we're more willing to go past something, but that's something that needs to be communicated. Okay, aftercare, that's super important. Like, you can request what sort of follow-up chivalry you would like from either side. Like, hey, like, I don't normally do this, or what I usually like is, sometimes people want no contact, that's fair. And the boundaries around all of it, again, that word is essential, because boundaries are what preserve you. They're what allow you to feel whole, to feel safe, to feel like you can do that. And we talked earlier about oxytocin. Mind your oxytocin. Be careful, because you might catch some feelings. And just get really clear with your intentions. Like, I can always tell when someone's telling me, oh, I don't want a relationship right now, I want this. And I'm talking in the context of clients. And it's being able to say, like, I could see deeper, like, I know, but don't be afraid to ask for the thing you truly want. If you're avoiding being vulnerable and actually making a declaration to the world of what you truly want, then it's time to step into that space, because it's so powerful to say, I've been avoiding actually getting hurt because I'm ready to go into that zone. Now, if you want to have casual encounters that feel like they're in integrity, it's really important that you get really into your body to understand if you're honoring yourself or not. That's the most important piece, is like, do you have to lose you to do anything? If you have to lose you to do anything, then it's not worth doing. So that's our public service announcement on
Perfectly.
boundaries.
So the central paradox, the big central paradox in an ongoing intimate relationship is like balancing the need for freedom and the need for togetherness. And this is what Esther did such a beautiful job with in her book, Mating in Captivity. This idea that those are both basic human needs. We need freedom, autonomy, the ability to express ourselves. And we need and want togetherness, and to feel like you're my rock and you've got my back and I can count on you and I can let down around you, because there's an established foundation of safety in our relationships. We crave safety and novelty. We crave togetherness, and we crave freedom. And so just a part of relational resilience, sexual resilience, is just being able to inhabit that, that paradox, and to ask yourself the question, what helps me feel drawn to my partner? And sometimes it's having a little bit of space. Like I love when, or being aware of that space. Like I love when I go to one of Todd's work events, and I'm a little bit like, I don't know a lot of people, and I get to kind of see him in his element, and he's working the room like that. And I think part of what draws me to him in that space is he feels not totally mine, right? Like in our house, in the safety of our house, in our bed, in our, he feels mine. I feel safe with him. I'm at home with him, right? Literally, like he is my home. And then, but experiencing him in those different settings where I'm aware, I'm reminded that, boy, he does not belong to me. He's got this whole self that gets expressed at work. And so stepping into that creates a little bit of danger, a little bit of a reminder of the unknown, and that sparks chemistry. So, so just being able to just honor like the mystery of that it's not a problem to be resolved. It's not like we fix it and we decide on autonomy is the way, or we decide togetherness is the way. Really what we find is that sitting with that mystery is really the way. It's not a resolvable thing to be fixed.
Yeah, it's kind of like we were talking earlier about the cage, right? Like if you feel like you're smothered by your partner, or you smother your partner, then you're not going to feel like you really want to desire them. In the beginning of the relationship, just sheer lust might be able to overcome that. And it is almost part of it. But at some point, the relationship grows separately from the individuals. Mm-hmm. But we often, because it was modeled to us by patriarchy too, is we lost who we are in the relationship, and the relationship consumes us. And so part of desire is being able to create this magnet, this like ability to create space between you. Often we get anxious in that space, or this smothering causes us to want to avoid and run. So really we have to take mindful of the self-care, mindful of this, like, okay, we have to take care of the things that are about us, because, Alexandra alluded to earlier, the depth to which you can meet anyone else will always be limited by the depth to which you understand yourself. So the more you understand your sexual story, the more you understand what turns you on, what turns you off, the more you understand even what your partner does outside of that. Those are all such important parts of the equation that create your sexual experience with the person that you're experiencing it with. But so much of what you bring to it can either be these tools and these compassionate experiences, or it can be a U-Haul that you tow a bunch of baggage with. And that's why it's so hard to actually put your foot on the gas, because you're towing a bunch of stuff that you haven't processed or looked at.
Great. This is just a really nice, simple tool from Dan Siegel, who is really one of our favorite teachers. I love his work. About, so what does it mean to take care of myself? It's really hard to cultivate, appreciate, and express your sexual self if you're just not in a healthy place, right? We can't kind of erotically override kind of like poor foundation within self. So the healthy mind platter is what Dan Siegel has come up with. Think of these, it's like a redo of the nutrition pyramid, like sort of the different elements, nutritional elements that we need to be healthy. These are kind of the energetic elements that we need to be healthy. So I think a nice way to use this tool is to just sort of think about which ingredients are you lacking, low on, lacking, or maybe excessively on. So are you getting adequate sleep? Are you taking care of your physical body with movement and exercise that really is restorative, expansive, it leaves you energized? Focus time is task-based, getting shit done kind of time. Time in is mindful, meditative time. Downtime is just check out, watch some Netflix time, that time where you really aren't engaging your brain in a focused kind of way. Playtime, just non-directive, expressive, playful time. And then connecting time. So it's a nice tool to kind of just assess yourself and maybe your partner, if you have a partner, have them assess themselves and kind of talk about where are you each doing fine, getting adequacy, and where are you coming up short and what might need to change, and how might that then affect time in the bedroom? And how does time in the bedroom, how does your sexual practice as a couple check some of these boxes? You know, I was thinking about what does sex count as? I think sex could be considered connecting time, could be considered playtime. If it's mindful, it could be considered time in, sort of sex as a meditation in and of itself.
Good workout.
Oh yeah, and good workout. That's right. That's right.
So of course there's going to be issues in our relationship sometimes, often, you know, where they're not sexual issues, they're just relationship issues. And that could be trust, it could be so many different aspects. But if we covered in that one, like, what are your breaks? The non-sexual relationship issues are really, what are the breaks that are going on? What are you angry or resentful about? And when you look at the idea of resentment usually is always a great indicator that whoever you resent is a magnifying glass to you not prioritizing yourself. So there comes that, like, balancing this, like, who I am as an individual and what I need in order to feel like myself and feel whole. That's going to be so important in the context of your relationship and being able to take care of you so that you can actually want to hook up with your partner, that you can actually want to be sexual and intimate with them. But when you're pissed at them because you got no free time, because you've got all these parts of yourself that you're not taking care of, it's going to be really hard to open up. So really being able to deal with those things.
I just want to say it one more time for the people in the back that to use resentment as a cue, a data point, right? It's a symptom or a sign inside of yourself that is worthy of your exploration, rather than being like, I resent you and therefore it's a problem with you, to loop it back and to wonder, what is my resentment telling me about a way in which I am abandoning me, not taking care of me, not activating or empowering me, declaring something that I want and need. It's great. Such a great point. So I think it's really easy, especially with desire discrepancies, to get into this finger pointing stance. You want too much sex. You are sex crazed. You don't want sex at all. You're frigid. It's really easy to get into this, like, pathologizing, finger pointing stance about sexual problems, especially sexual desire discrepancy problems. But it's so important for couples to view sexual problems as couple problems. It's always about the couple. And so the stance that we work therapeutically with couples who are struggling with their sex lives, the stance is to help them stand shoulder to shoulder, looking together at the problem, which is a sexual problem. That stance, so instead of me versus you, it's us versus the problem.
I love that.
Yeah, that stance shift is like, it's everything. Because from that shoulder to shoulder looking together at it, there's infinite possibility. We have no idea, right? We have no idea what's possible, what the couple may come up with to help them navigate the trickiness of the problem. But they can't even get up to the plate as long as the story is, this sexual problem is in our lives because of you. No, this sexual problem is in our lives because of you. So moving beyond that stance to a shoulder to shoulder, look at it together, is the first step towards any other sort of problem solving, conversation, exploration. I love this quote. The first thing you should know about me is that I'm not you. A lot more will make sense after that. It's so easy to project our own sexuality, our own sexual stories, our own sexual beliefs, desires, hang-ups, accelerators and brakes onto our partners. We get really sort of like myopic. And so we're encouraging you to just really value curiosity. Curiosity about who your partner is as a like entire separate locus of consciousness, and like get to know that. think a beautiful conversation for couples to have is like, tell me your sexual story.
Mm-hmm.
Start from the beginning. What were your first sexual experiences? Like, how was sex talked about in your home? What were sort of the cultural messages? You know, that just really understanding your partner as separate from you with their own mysteries and stories. And then that air of curiosity and exploration goes back to that idea of there being space. There's space, and our partners are never to be fully known and mastered. And sexuality changes over time. So whoever you are as a sexual being at age 21 is not who you'll be as a sexual being at age 41. And it's not who you'll be as a sexual being at age 61. So it's a constant redoing and redoing and redoing, which makes it so exciting, right? It's because it's an unfolding story.
Yeah, it's like the becoming of a sex Jedi. Like you're becoming like sex Yoda. You could, if we continue to talk about it. So part of the solutions, and we're going to send in follow-up, some details on some of these things. So mindfulness we've alluded to a few times. To me, this is actually one of the relational tools that if you want to get really good at relationships, you have to be able to step outside of you. Yeah, you have to be able to begin, just much like the practice of saying, this desire thing is actually separate of me and them. It's a thing between us, and it's our challenge, not their challenge or my challenge. And that makes it a team thing. But mindfulness allows us to observe our thoughts and not be them. You know, I often tell people that if you start to see your mind being more like a computer, that you get to choose how it runs, what the programs are, what you want to do with it. The access to that is just downloading an app like Headspace. I mean, gosh, it teaches you how. The guy's got the most sexy, brilliant voice I've ever heard. Hello, this is Andy. Thoughts are like clouds. They float through your head. It's really good. He's got a great voice. I heard him actually at a cafe once in Venice, and I was like, that's the guy from Headspace.
Did you really?
Yeah, and I was like, instantly knew his voice. But mindfulness to me is actually probably one of the greatest access points to understanding you, to being able to observe non-judgmentally another, to know it, to step outside of conflict so you can observe it and not be in it. Because your reactivity, the feeling you have when you get flooded, your nervous system responding, the fight, flight, freeze, the more you get into your space, the mindfulness aspect, the more you can actually observe it and not allow it to choose for you. And Sensate Focus.
Mm-hmm. Sensate Focus is like an old school sex therapy 101 tool that packs such a punch. It's so powerful. And we're going to send an article about it. But just briefly, Sensate Focus is used by sex therapists and couples therapists as an assessment tool and an intervention tool. Basically, it is non-goal oriented touch. So the basic like level 1 Sensate Focus exercise is one partner lies down. My mom would kill me.
Both. I like both.
And the other partner just does long caresses, like long touch. And in level 1, you're not touching genitals. You're not trying to give the person an orgasm. You're just touching. And both partners, the toucher and the touchee, are practicing mindfulness. So they're just being present with what it's like to touch their partner, and they're being present to what it's like to be touched. And what it highlights, what the practice, and then the instructions are, you're not allowed to, have sex or do something that's goal-oriented towards orgasm for 3 or 4 hours afterwards, because the idea is to separate the pleasure of touch from the goal of orgasm. To us, one of the main problems with sex is we get so goal-oriented, so outcome-oriented, so performance-based about the goal is orgasm, that a practice like this, of just getting into your body, it's so illuminating about what is your relationship with touch. Do you have some constraints with being the receiver of pleasure for pleasure's sake? Do you have some fears about giving pleasure? And do you have stories that I'm not doing this the right way? Performance-based stories. Sensate Focus will highlight all of those, and when they're highlighted, it gives you then some wiggle room about what do you want to do about it? How do you transform that old story in the service of something that's just juicier and more interesting? So that's Sensate Focus, and we'll send you some more materials.
And that'll force you to receive too. Because, you know, often we avoid or rush sex because we're afraid to be held in that captive, vulnerable space, like that space where we will be seen. And so sex as a practice is this like ability to like put it in your calendar, find time, like really like, I think it's fascinating that we think we're just supposed to be good at sex, that we shouldn't actually have to figure out how to move your hips, what works, what turns someone on. And each person is different. I joke often that I wish every woman in my life, in my previous experience, had come with a Google Maps, because every woman is so different, that how every human operates is so different. And it's both a beautiful complexity and a wonderful mystery. Mm-hmm. Like, isn't it, to know that there's so many parts as we evolve too and change, that we get to know different parts of them?
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say, also, I think one of the things that can happen for same-sex couples is those assumptions get really big. Like, we both have the same operating system. So my assumptions may be that your parts work the same way as my parts work. So sometimes I think LGBT couples can feel even more, can maybe struggle even more with minding assumptions and just being curious. And then for couples where one or both partners are transgender, the whole getting to know, moving from an old body to a new body, like expressing and experiencing a lot of compassion for all the parts of the body, wherever one's body is. So there's, I just love that idea of sex as a practice, that there's always more to be gleaned. And the other thing about sex as a practice is that for couples, when they put it in their calendar, it can kind of remove this whole, like, was I good enough this week to have earned sex? Like, it just becomes sort of this, it can override for the responsive desire partner. It can override, do I really want to? By just being like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to trust. I trust me. I trust you. I trust us. Valuing non-sexual touch. This is something I think that's really helpful when you have a responsive desire partner and a spontaneous desire partner. Sometimes if somebody has responsive desire, it feels like when their partner touches them, it's a cue, like, honey, I want sex. And that can be a break. So if there's just a lot of non-sexual touch throughout the week, where we're just, whatever, slapping a booty in the kitchen or having a 30-second, makeout session in the kitchen, where it's not going to lead to anything, but it just infuses the week with erotic energy and sets the stage then for entering that sexual space. It's something that Stephen Schneider, one of the an amazing new book that just came out, Love Worth Making. He really encourages this practice. He calls it simmering, just sort of simmering all week long, like just kind of low level, lots of touch that isn't necessarily going to go anywhere, but just reminds you and your partner that you're sexual, erotic beings. The sexual two-step is a practice. Step one is just two partners laying down together, and just quieting, sort of being, it's like a mindful meditation, but together. So sex beginning as just a quieting of the mind and finding that really silent, open space inside. That's step one. And then step two is beginning. This is the example he gives in the book is a male-female couple where she has just kind of a struggle entering that space, kind of quieting the rest of the world and entering that space. And so she and her partner tried this. So she would put her hand on his chest, slow her breathing, let the world go, claim her authority, her deservingness of sexual pleasure. And then that was step one. And then step two was to kind of hold that quiet feeling inside and begin to touch him. So really taking leadership in the sexual journey together. And that she found really helpful in terms of helping her shift from the other roles, mother, worker, whatever, father, husband, into erotic partner.
Yeah, and the last one, orgasmic meditation, you've probably heard of this. It's also from a company called One Taste. It's called Oming. And the idea is to actually change a woman's relationship to orgasm. We were talking before about this performance base. The touch can feel like so many demands, especially if kids are touching a mom all day. All of a sudden, touch can be like, I don't get to be myself. I don't have, and so it doesn't feel like it comes without some sort of contract. This is really fascinating. We're going to send out a video on this, and it's about touching the outside of the genitals in a certain way, and just for a woman to experience this mindful space of orgasm and touch, to be touched by someone too. And the practice actually has it where they have a stranger do it, which I think is quite interesting. And I don't maybe necessarily recommend that part. But you can do it with your partner, and I know there are videos that explain how to do it, and it's really all about the woman in that moment. It's really cool. It's really interesting to learn about. So we'll send the link for that in follow-up.
You know what? While we're there, I think just a general shout out to masturbation ought to be on this list.
Oh yeah. Shit, we didn't put masturbation on there.
No, but it is, I think, especially for, I think with men, because their genitals are on the outside, they've had a really steady feedback loop their whole lives. Like, oh, I'm turned on. Oh, I'm not turned on. Or like, what does it feel like when I do this to this thing? Like, I think they're sort of more, I think just culturally sanctioned. Masturbation for men is somewhat more culturally sanctioned than for women. So for women, I think the notion is I have to wait until my partner gives me an orgasm, and there it can be such liberation and empowerment that comes from masturbation and understanding your own pleasure that starts from you. And then that becomes a place from which you can communicate to a partner what works for you based on what you've learned about yourself through masturbation.
Yeah, masturbation with mindfulness. That is like the recipe for sexual success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so long-term sex on fleek. I know we all think that when relationships are long, that sex dies and passion diminishes. So this study looked at over 38,000 married and cohabitating heterosexual couples, and they'd been together for 3 or more years. The men were from 18 to 65, and a lot of them had been together for 2 decades or more. And so it's really fascinating. There was a similar study that is on same-sex couples that's actually being done right now. So we'll get more information on that. So the majority of these people, so 1 in 3 actually reported that their sex lives were as passionate now as in the beginning. Isn't that crazy? I think that's amazing to know that you could do that. And there's another research from Helen Fisher that looks at people in the honeymoon phase versus people married for on average 21 years, and they still had the honeymoon phase parts of their brains light up in MRI. So it shows you can keep love alive. Now, what was it about the couples that kept love alive, Alexandra?
So these are the behavioral things. They had sex more frequently. Sex begets sex. That's sort of like use it or lose it idea. So had sex more frequently, received more oral sex. When a man and a woman are having sex together, only about 25 to 30% of women have orgasms just from vaginal penetration with the penis. The vast majority of women really need other kinds of stimulation, so especially oral sex. Had more consistent orgasms, which makes sense that the better it feels, the more motivated you're going to be to do it more. And they really valued setting the scene. So they had variety in their sex acts, mood setting, and communication. So they talked about sex. They focused especially on her pleasure. They had some variety. And they set the stage.
Yeah, it's amazing when you can start to see that it's possible, because I think this research really indicates that. And, we want to bring this to a close to say that there's so much more to this. Like, we actually wanted this to be about an hour and 45 minutes with it. So we could talk all day about it, but there's so much about connection, love, intimacy, but about our own physiology, our own bodies. And we want to dive deeper. We did create, and we're not into selling, so we'll just give you the information that we did create a 4-week course that we're going to go much deeper of a dive in this than what this is. And so you're going to get homework, assignments, videos, readings, but for 4 weeks where when you leave it, you'll become like a sexual Jedi, that's a pretty good thing. And so for the people on the webinar, it's going to be $247. It's normally $350. And the idea, I mean, I love this image, so I just want to share it because I love it. Like two people in bed cheering. So we'll send that in the follow-up link where you can register. You have to register in the next couple of days, but you'll get sent the link so you can register. And then the course will start in just about a month. We'll get you the starting date, and you'll have time every week to finish the assignments, and it will be dripped to you. So every week we'll release a new module for 4 weeks. And as part of that, for this first part of the class, for the people on the webinar, we'll hop on a call to answer questions bi-weekly and just do a quick rundown with everyone. So sex is so important to us as humans. Like, it's such an important subject. And Go Make Love, I mean, that's, I think, the best homework I've ever thought of and want other people to experience. But this is what makes us, you know. It makes sense that we're driven to do it. It makes us not only more connected to ourselves, but it's a shared, beautiful space where we're connected with our partners, whoever that may be, and in whatever context that way may be. I really, you know, I remember reading that there's 3 stages of relationship. The first one is, I need you. And that's sort of that enmeshment, that part where we're sort of lost ourselves in the other. And the second one is, I don't need anybody. So I have walls, I'm independent, I don't need anyone. And the third one being, through you, I find me. Through you, I find God. Through you, I find my highest self. And I really don't believe there's any faster way to actualization, to awareness, to growth than facing someone and seeing what you're not so good at and what you can be good at. And God, sex is such a beautiful gateway to your vulnerabilities and to what you're afraid to step towards. And I don't want to speak for Alexandra, but I just really hope that this is just the first part of your understanding and acceptance of who you are and maybe how you differ but now how you see you're actually similar to everyone. Mm-hmm. And that there's some element of compassion and acceptance that you've achieved through our words today. Mm-hmm. Do you want to say anything, Alexandra?
No, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful way of wrapping it up. Yeah, of just sort of neither diminishing the power of sex nor overstating. I mean, just it's a beautiful vehicle and something that we don't spend enough time learning about and appreciating. And so I love what you're saying about just can be so easy to feel like I'm the only one. I must be the only one who struggles with that. So that's my hope too, is that people can come away from this feeling less shame-loaded and more curious.
Yeah, and if you have any other people friends who you think would want to do the course with you, let us know. We're happy to give them the price too, because I think everyone should have this sex ed. Like, I love this information, and it's so important to understand what you're doing when you're entering sexual experiences, to go into them with knowledge and power. Like, I wish my school had taught me this, so then I could have stepped into sexual experiences knowing if I needed to have boundaries, how to ask for what I wanted, why I might not have as much desire because I'm experiencing immense grief. Yeah. You know, like things like that. After a breakup, you can sometimes not want to do anything. And of course, what's the first advice people? To get over your ex, get under the next. Well, that's a great way to distract yourself for a moment. So if any of you have any questions, I know we have one, and it is, what about when one person feels they experienced a connection and the other partner feels that the first person was actually disconnected? So what happens if I am having sex with someone and I say that I feel I am experiencing a deep connection, but they tell me I'm not actually, they felt disconnection from me? Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Of course, like, two people can experience the exact same experience very differently. Mm-hmm. I think the first part I would invite there is curiosity. What was disconnective about me for you? Because the natural part we would want to say is to defend ourselves, to say, I was extremely connected in that. What are you talking about? I saw God, I orgasmed, I was all over, I was open, I did it with the lights on. We want to go and defend. But I think there's probably, again, that sex is such a dance that is so much more than just the sex. You know, like, there's so much more. And I really am such a proponent of the information for men too, that it is so much more than just your dick. Your heart is literally and figuratively connected to your penis. And when you are not experiencing desire, you're more complex than you've been told. Let me just say that. And that's a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. So the sort of solution to your question, at least, and Alexander might have a different or some more advice, is get curious. What was disconnecting about me for you? What was it about what happened there that you felt I was disconnected? And be open to hearing it, because it could be that they're disconnected from themselves in that moment, or what can happen if there's a large amount of conflict or struggle in the relationship, or even a small amount, that the more anxious partner, their radar is on during that intimacy, and it's going, are we connected? She's not, or he's not making eye contact with me right now. Oh, they want to do doggy style? That's not very intimate. So they're starting to look for all this evidence of disconnection. Mm-hmm. And that's such a normal thing, especially for people who are prone to anxiety, because they're like research proven hypersensitive to small changes in facial, in tone, in everything. So just being mindful to be open to that and to hear it and to love that feedback and say, I could see how you might have seen that. Is there any ways you saw me being connected? Mm-hmm. And just shifting the conversation a little, but allowing, when there's anxiety in a relationship, allowing the space to renew security, which can take a bit of time. It's not going to happen the first time you have sex. Actually, that conversation that says, tell me more about the disconnection, that's connective.
I love that. I agree. Well, and I think also to make space to talk about what do you mean by the word connection? Like we sometimes get limited by the semantics, right, of the word choice. So I would really want to know more, like what is your story of what connective sex looks like? And to what degree does it match up with mine or not match up with mine? Like even the example you're saying about doggy style equals disconnection. In somebody else's world, that may equal total connection, because there's a kind of vulnerability that comes from positioning oneself that way that actually feels incredibly connected, because what I'm saying is I trust you enough, blah, 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 whatever that is. So we can take a data point like your eyes were closed, like it was doggy style, like you were quiet, and import meaning. And so to kind of back up and again, hold that shoulder to shoulder space and just look together at, tell me your story about what connection during sex looks like. And then I would love for you to be curious about what it looks like for me, rather than that importing and projecting of meaning.
Beautiful. Okay, we got one more question. I have grown up a lot. I have grown up with a lot of shame around sex, and so I always shied away from sexual relationships. And now that I'm older, I feel it is so important and would like to experience it more. But I get really bad performance-based anxiety when I'm in the moment and with someone, because I feel like I won't be good at sex. So it's hard for me to let go, be vulnerable, enjoy actually having sex, and this affects my relationships. Any advice?
I love this question. I mean, I think, first of all, asking this question, like whenever, like asking a question that feels tender is the first step towards transforming shame. Because now the question doesn't just live inside of me. I've put it out into the space. And I think I hear some version of this all of the time. And I think one key element for any sexual experience is to just hold space for the possibility of absurdity, of humor. Like stuff always goes wrong during sex. It doesn't ever, real life sex does not look like porn sex. Real life sex does not look like romantic comedy sex.
No.
Elbows bump into stuff, just stuff goes wrong. Stuff slips out. And so it is.
Stuff slips in.
Stuff slips in. So for you especially, where there's a lot of shame, you need to be with a partner where you can voice, I'm nervous, I'm afraid of being awkward, and there can just be the possibility of humor where the two of you would laugh together when stuff doesn't work the way that it works on TV. So that's the kind of safety that I think would be really important. The safety creates the sort of like safe space from which you can take risk. You need to feel safe to risk. Safety and risk are in a tension with each other. So I would never want you to expect of yourself to risk without having a foundation of safety. And part of that safety is if stuff gets awkward and weird, if I'm awkward and weird, that you're not going to point your finger and laugh, that you're going to just kind of stay connected with me.
Yeah, and I love this question. I see a lot of myself in this question. I've certainly had that experience of wanting to be good at it when no one taught me how to be good at it. You know, the internet first came out when I was first thinking about all of that stuff, so it gives you my rough age. And I had to wait on dial-up for shit to load. Some of you would never be able to handle it. But I remember looking up like how to do cunnilingus, how to do these things. And I think my greatest piece of advice that I could give to this is you might feel safer going at it with people you don't know that well, but I would not necessarily recommend that, because that could be the place where you feel safe, but and it can feel like you can perform or not perform and you'll never see them again. But that won't actually resolve the like deep part of the vulnerability, which is important when you get a new partner or you're in a relationship, to say, like, I used to get new partner anxiety all the time, that if I was entering a relationship with someone and I actually thought I really loved them and was going to care about them. And so in order to deal with that, because I never wanted my shame or my fear to ever have control. So I would just say, sometimes I get new partner anxiety, and it's just something that happens and it has nothing to do with you. And inevitably what would happen is I wouldn't get it. Or I'd kind of get it, and then it'd be like, oh, there's that new partner anxiety. It must be that I care about you. And it was like this really different way of shifting it. Although I got to tell you, at the exact same moment, both and, I was living in a bit of shame. I would have this shame of like, I can't get fully erect or whatever. And then, but at the exact same time, what was happening was the lack of secrecy was allowing that to live out in the open, to say like, hey, this isn't you. Because often the other partner can be like, well, that's me. Is it me who's not? And so it really sort of brought public space to the experience. So I think just being open about it, as Alexander said, like, it seldom goes the way we think. And having I wouldn't watch porn for an example. Like, I've never seen a pizza get delivered with that story after. So just some idea. So hopefully that's helpful. There are no other questions. So have the most beautiful Saturday or Sunday or Monday or Tuesday, whenever you're watching this. So much gratitude for you, Alexander, for sharing your wisdom, and for all these people for joining us today.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed partnering with you on this. And I hope that this feels really helpful to people.
Yeah. We're going to send up the slides and the links and all that stuff with the click to the course, so you can sign up right away. We have limited spots on that. And we're really looking forward to diving deeper into this subject with you guys. It's going to be like all encompassing. So we just can't wait. So you guys have the most wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
And that